What would you do if one day you woke up to find yourself in the body of one of those rich delinquent characters who tend to be a pain for all the people around them? Oh, and you already know that the character is meant to have a tragic fate. Well, that's what happened to Suho Kim, an everyday civil engineer graduate who ended up as a character in a novel he read the prior night. Now, with his new identity as Lloyd Frontera, Suho Kim intends to use his knowledge to get his family out of debt and change the tragic future that awaits him, and also getting super rich through less than heroic means. Suho Kim, the protagonist of our story, goes by the name Lloyd Frontera in the world he finds himself in. He reveals his ambitious plan to his subordinate, Javier, to turn empty land into money. However, Javier finds this idea ridiculous. A few years ago, Suho Kim woke up to find himself in another world, where a screen appeared before him. The screen informed him that he had been selected by the Absolute to have a random wish granted. He soon discovered that he was now a character in a book called Night of Blood and Iron, the very same book he had finished reading the night before. As Suho Kim tried to wrap his head around his situation, Javier suddenly appeared and addressed him as Lloyd. It dawned on Suho that he had been reincarnated as the ruffian character from the novel, Lloyd Frontera. As they returned to the manor, Javier revealed to Lloyd that he had been drinking at the bar and had ended up causing some damage to their furniture. He also shared that he had passed out on his way back to the manor. After informing Lloyd of this, Javier left him alone to rest. Lloyd is aware of the events that occur in the novel and despises being part of it, knowing that he doesn't have a happy ending. The following day, Lloyd's mother confronts him about the incident at the pub and the damages he causes. She demands that he apologize to the owner, and much to her and Javier's surprise, Lloyd agrees to do so. As they arrive at the pub, Javier feels something off about Lloyd since last night. Lloyd then apologizes to the pub's owner, who seems to be scared of him and told him not to apologize. While returning home, Lloyd expressed his disappointment with the pub owner's response to his apology. Javier explained that the owner had worked hard to buy everything Lloyd had damaged and suffered greatly because of his actions. As they were talking, Lloyd noticed that the inside of the pub was quite chilly. Being a civil engineer in his past life, Lloyd had experience in building houses and came up with an idea. He asked Javier to accompany him back to the pub as he was ready to take on his first construction project. Lloyd wants to improve his reputation, but he realizes that the only way to do so is by building better relationships with others. He starts by complimenting Javier, but it backfires and his approval rating drops even further. Realizing this, Lloyd decides to save his efforts for another time. Later, Lloyd makes the pub owner sign a construction contract using his hooligan image. As Lloyd is about to start the construction work at the pub, Javier confronts him about his behavior towards the pub owner. However, Lloyd thinks that Javier is biased. In response, Lloyd tells Javier that he will make both the pub owner and his mother smile, as they will be the foundation of his business success. Within a week, Lloyd successfully constructs the foundation of an ondol house, a traditional Korean house with heated floors. However, Javier remains suspicious of Lloyd. Seeing Lloyd struggle with the woodwork, Javier decides to step in and help. He demonstrates his exceptional cutting skills, surprising Lloyd. After witnessing Javier's cutting skills, Lloyd requests his help with digging. Initially, Javier regrets offering his help, but Lloyd manages to trick him into working harder and faster by making him curious about his true intentions. Javier agrees to help with the project as he wants to see what Lloyd is scheming, and the only way to do that is by completing the construction. After working tirelessly on the construction, Lloyd and Javier present the finished ondol house to the pub owner and Lloyd's mother. They are both impressed and grateful for the cozy new home. Javier is surprised by Lloyd's dedication and hard work, but he's pleased to see the pub owner and Lloyd's mother happy. Additionally, thanks to Javier's improved opinion of him, Lloyd's RP increases slightly. A few days later, many people visit the house that Lloyd and Javier built, and Lloyd is eager to attract even more customers. During lunch, Lloyd's father asked him about his recent activities, and Lloyd explained everything to him. Lloyd's father also asked if he was taking orders from other people and cautioned him against tricking them. Lloyd reassured his father that he had no such intentions. As Lloyd is about to leave, his father asks him if he's doing all of this because of their debt. He then assures Lloyd that he will get them out of this. Lloyd is in his room, contemplating ways to increase his RP. Suddenly, the system begins scanning him and he discovers that it found all the civil engineering data in his head. Lloyd receives a new skill from the system, including basic surveying and basic designing, which will be beneficial for his future endeavors. He is also given a summoning skill, which allows him to get his own partner by spending some RP. He then decides to raise his RP as soon as possible. Meanwhile, Lloyd's father is visited by the people he owes money to, and they start insulting him. Lloyd steps in to ask to see their warrant, but they don't have one. He then informs them that entering a noble's residence without a warrant is considered trespassing. The men protest, but Lloyd calls Javier and orders him to cut their arms. The men leave immediately. After the incident with the debt collectors, Lloyd hands his father a bag of money he earned from his orders. However, his father is not sure of his methods. Javier intervenes and assures Lloyd's father that he will watch over him. Finally, they both leave the room. Lloyd feels happy as he sees his RP increasing due to his father's approval. Lloyd started a summon game at night and a magic circle appeared before him. However, he was disappointed to see that it was tiny and noisy. To make matters worse, his summon partner turned out to be a hamster named Podong. Lloyd discovered sunflower seeds in his manual that were supposed to make him grow. Out of curiosity, he fed a sunflower seed to Podong and was amazed to see the hamster grow 100 times bigger than before. Lloyd then realized that he no longer needed heavy equipment because he now had a giant hamster as his partner. The next day, Lloyd gathered 30 soldiers of his father's to use them as free labor. He tried to motivate them with a pep talk, but they seemed uninterested. Suddenly, his father's senior knight, Neumann, appeared and asked Lloyd about his plans for the men. Neumann didn't seem happy about the soldiers being used in this way. It was revealed that Neumann had betrayed Lloyd's father in the past and fled the scene. Lloyd informed him that he had his father's permission to use the soldiers. When Neumann tried to act clever, Lloyd deliberately threw dirt on him to provoke him. This caused Neumann to lose his temper and insult Lloyd, so Lloyd challenged him to a duel. Lloyd revealed his plan to duel Neumann in a month and asked Javier to teach him how to use a sword. However, Javier refused, stating that his job was only to watch over Lloyd. He also explained that if someone like Lloyd, who is considered to be trash, learned how to use a sword, it could put others in great danger. Lloyd made an offer to Javier to cure his insomnia in exchange for teaching him how to use a sword. Javier was surprised that Lloyd knew about his condition, but he eventually agreed to the deal. Despite his doubts, he accepted Lloyd's offer. Later on, Javier was seen sleeping soundly. It was revealed that Lloyd had read Javier's reinforced concrete textbook to him, which was 18 times more effective than any magic spell in curing his insomnia. Javier began Lloyd's training by instructing him to run. However, Lloyd didn't enjoy running and asked Javier to teach him real skills instead. While he was running, Lloyd realized that his current pain was nothing compared to the tireless work he had done in Korea. Running was much easier for him than the pain he had previously endured. Lloyd continued running until Javier finally decided to teach him sword fighting. As a result, Lloyd's approval rating on a pop-up screen increased, showing that Javier was pleased with his progress. Neumann reports to Lloyd's father about what had happened earlier. This makes Lloyd's father disappointed, and he permits Neumann to duel with Lloyd. He asked Neumann to be gentle with Lloyd and to bring him back to his senses. However, Neumann is planning something sinister that Lloyd's father is unaware of. After a month of training, the day of the duel between Lloyd and Neumann had arrived. Lloyd was ready and excited to knock out Neumann. As the duel began, the people were surprised to see that Lloyd was carrying a shovel to fight Neumann. This angered Neumann, and Javier realized that Lloyd was not joking and was more serious than ever. Despite the unusual choice of weapon, Lloyd's father allowed the duel to commence. Neumann began attacking Lloyd, but Lloyd was able to avoid his attacks using unusual movements that no one could understand. Lloyd had actually been using modern hand-to-hand combat techniques, specifically the bayonet training technique. Lloyd had chosen the shovel as his weapon due to an increase in his RP caused by his parents' approval, which allowed him to learn the shoveling skill. Meanwhile, Neumann had no choice but to activate his mana heart as he faced the challenge of fighting against Lloyd's unique combat style. Javier initially believed that it would be difficult for Lloyd to avoid Neumann's attacks now that he had activated his skill. However, Lloyd surprised everyone by blocking Neumann's attacks and activating the Asheron core technique. This allowed him to absorb all of Neumann's mana and hit him in the face with his shovel. One of Norman's teeth fell out as he got hit with Lloyd's shovel. Lloyd then proceeded to hit his head hard with the shovel, knocking him out completely. Everyone was shocked to see Norman getting knocked out by Lloyd, while his father hesitatingly declared him the winner. Lloyd continued to beat Norman with the shovel, prompting his father to intervene and try to stop him. Lloyd continued to beat Norman even after the soldiers arrived to stop him. Javier paid close attention to Lloyd's expressions and behavior and realized that Lloyd had seemed to be acting as he had predicted these events in the future. 15 days prior to the duel, Lloyd surprised Javier by asking him to teach him the Asrahan core technique. When Javier questioned him about how he knew about it, Lloyd revealed that Javier talks about it in his sleep. Javier refused to teach him the technique, stating that it is unfinished. However, Lloyd offered to help him perfect it, explaining how he could use his Asrahan core technique in combination with his mana heart. With Lloyd's guidance, Javier was able to perfect his technique. As Lloyd's father tried to stop him from beating Norman, Lloyd asked his father to look under the tablecloth. To his surprise, his father found a bunch of letters between Norman and Tortoise, the man who defrauded him in a real estate deal. This discovery shocked Lloyd's father. Lloyd suggests to his father a punishment for Norman, dropping a vicious mouse on his head. If Norman gets hurt by the mouse, he should be exiled from their land. Otherwise, he should be demoted to a foot soldier and given the opportunity to repent. Lloyd's father was impressed with Lloyd's suggestion and agreed to act on it, even though Lloyd knew that Norman was unlikely to repent. Lloyd then gave a sunflower seed to Padang, who grew bigger and bigger, much to everyone's shock. Lloyd then escaped to the spot and let Padang slam on top of Norman, injuring him as a result. Lloyd then announced Norman's exile from their land. The next day, Padang is seen carving out a road and Lloyd successfully transforms his weak soldiers into efficient construction workers. They were now ready to begin their real work. Lloyd plans on using ancient Rome's method to create the roads that were called the Great Appian Way. Javier was curious as to why Lloyd wanted to create a road. Lloyd explained to him that it was going to put their land on the map. He then asked Lloyd where he acquired all this knowledge from. Javier was getting suspicious of Lloyd's identity, and Lloyd received this warning on a pop-up screen. Lloyd believes that if he starts suspecting someone else to have gotten a hold of Lloyd's body, he will use his sword on him. Using a special skill, stubborn insistence, Lloyd convinced Javier that he had been studying secretly to acquire the knowledge he possessed. He avoided Javier's suspicious questions and got ready to leave, telling Byron to oversee the construction work in his absence. Lloyd then revealed to Javier that they were going on a trip to recover the money stolen from them, but did not disclose the destination. We're taken to the town of Ludania, where Tortoise is seen to be in distress because he lost some money while gambling. Just then, Lloyd pays a visit to him. Tortoise's bodyguard carries him outside where he meets Javier. Javier, who has improved his fighting skills, scares away the bodyguard and confronts Tortoise. However, Lloyd stops him from attacking Tortoise. Lloyd and Javier capture Tortoise and tie him up. Tortoise is extremely scared of them. Lloyd thinks that handing him over to the court will be too harsh, so he decides not to do that. Instead, he tells Tortoise that he needs to return all of his money. Tortoise agrees to this and asks if Lloyd will forgive him afterwards. However, Lloyd tells him that he's only getting started. Lloyd makes a deal with Tortoise to repay the money he defrauded by presenting a job contract with a catch. Tortoise will receive a salary, but 80% of it will be held back for repayment. This means it will take 520 years for Tortoise to fully repay the money he owes Lloyd. Tortoise is shocked, but Lloyd threatens to take him to court if he refuses to sign the contract. Tortoise reluctantly signs the contract, agreeing to the terms. On their way back, Lloyd shares his plan with Javier. He intends to use this money he will receive from Tortoise to hire more men for their construction work, but is worried about his reputation as people don't really trust him. Lloyd is surprised to see the positive response from the people to his job offer. It seems that his reputation has been restored among them. He even receives gratitude from one of the guys who he built the Nandal house for. The man informs him that his relatives in another town are also interested in Lloyd's services. This leads Lloyd to the realization that he can increase his profits and use travel expenses as a valid excuse. This will help him make more profits and expand his business. Lloyd shares with Javier his plan of deforesting the mountains to use the trees as fuel for his work. To execute this plan, he's been constructing a road that leads to the mountains and will also be mining for black coal. Although Javier warns him about the challenges involved in mining coal, Lloyd has already thought about it and is prepared for it. Lloyd realizes the importance of having the right skills and tools to carry out the mining work efficiently. Since Podong is unwell, he decides to play a summon game to find a new ally. He successfully summons Bengal, a super cute monster who has a unique skill of chomping dirt. Lloyd and his team utilize Bengal's skill to dig out the mine quickly and efficiently. They work tirelessly in order to search for the black coal inside the mine. Lloyd is almost at the coal he had been mining for, but he thanks Bengal for helping them work faster. Suddenly, he hears some noises and discovers a hole in the wall. A huge ant emerges and attacks Lloyd, but he manages to kill it with his shovel. However, the danger is not over, as an entire colony of ants is waiting to attack Lloyd and his men. Lloyd orders everyone to run away to safety. Javier fights off the ants while Lloyd quickly formulates his plan. Javier then slaps Lloyd as he thought he was panicking and doing nothing. However, Lloyd revealed to Javier that he's been thinking of a plan and not panicking. He tells Javier that they will head straight to the ants' nest to face them directly. At first, Javier thinks it's a crazy idea, but he trusts Lloyd and goes along with it. The Baron is informed of the ants' attack in the mine, and he gets ready to go and help his son. Meanwhile, as Lloyd and Javier continue to move forward, Lloyd realizes that Javier is struggling due to the lack of oxygen and decides to search for the methane gas that could potentially destroy the ant colony. Using his skills, Lloyd is able to locate the gas underground and begins digging to reach it. He tells Javier to slice up the ants while he digs the ground. Just then, they hear a terrific sound and come across the queen of the ants. Javier revealed to Lloyd that he won't be able to hold back the queen, but has no other option than trying. He attacks the queen in order to keep her distracted while Lloyd digs up the ground. He then tells Javier to run to the exit. Both of them run to the exit and Lloyd throws his torch towards the ants, and as a result, they blow up because of the methane gas. Lloyd's father heard the explosion inside and wanted to go check but was held back by Bayern. Meanwhile, Lloyd finds the exit collapsed and blocked. A message pops up in front of him that he is running out of oxygen. He has no other option but to dig for more than 15 feet to get to the other side. As he starts digging, Javier looks at him, struggling for both him and Bengal before finally collapsing. Lloyd's approval rating by Javier had increased by +6 points as a result. Lloyd is gradually running out of oxygen, so he tells his messenger to look for a skill that he could upgrade. After scanning Lloyd, he is informed by the messenger that he could combine his pre-existing skills into the Asrahan core technique. Lloyd is able to activate the advanced Asrahan core technique, and now that he has more RP, he can amplify it even more. He keeps leveling up his skill by using his RP until it's upgraded. Lloyd then uses his Energizer skill, which could make him move for 10 minutes without experiencing fatigue, and digs up the hole for 10 minutes. However, it's not enough time to take him to the exit. He then activates his Latent Power Surge skill that triples his mana amplification for 20 minutes. However, he's still not able to dig up the hole to the exit, and his oxygen depletes fully. But luckily, Podong is able to dig a hole from the outside that supplies oxygen to Lloyd, and he stands back up. Meanwhile, the Baron and his men visit the mine and come across Lloyd, who was carrying Javier. Lloyd then collapses right in front of him. The next day, people seem to be talking about Lloyd's bravery. As Lloyd wakes up from his deep sleep, he sees a pop-up screen in front of him, informing him that all of his father's subjects were deeply moved by his heroic courage. As a reward, he's granted a 500 bonus of RP, much to Lloyd's excitement. Lloyd and Javier are back inside the mine where the workers greet Lloyd with so much respect in their hearts. They feel indebted to Lloyd because he saved their lives. Lloyd finds it uncomfortable though. It is revealed that 2 weeks have passed since the ant attack. And everything is going smoothly, but Lloyd is still very careful while going deep into the mine. He starts searching for the ant tunnels again along with Javier. Javier is curious about Lloyd doing dangerous work when he could just ask the workers to do it for him. Lloyd explains to him that if he does this kind of dangerous work, no one will be able to complain if he gets the most money, much to Javier's disappointment. They reach the end of the tunnel and come across a sleeping orc and a bunch of other animals that the ants have stored away as their food. Lloyd gets happy because he got his hands on an amazing new item. Later, the orc introduces himself as Arash to Lloyd and tells Lloyd that he will grant him anything he wants since Lloyd saved his life. Lloyd then asks the orc to supply him with 120 orcs to work in the mine. Arash told him that this was not possible because the orcs are warriors, and they can only follow a warrior's order. It is revealed that the orcs celebrate the coming-of-age ceremony after they bring the head of an ant they had killed, and that Arash wasn't able to kill a single ant and was paralyzed by them instead. Lloyd was successfully able to make Arash think that he and Lloyd together killed the queen, and was able to get the 120 orcs from him. A week later, when they reached the orc tribe, the chief tribe dismissed Lloyd's request as he could not reduce the number of orcs on the hunt. They need to hunt and eat a lot of meat in order to sustain their muscles. Otherwise, if they lose their muscles, that would mean the end of their tribe. Lloyd made an offer to the chief, asking him if it was possible to make his meat last for multiple days without spoiling. This would save them the trouble of hunting 3 times a day, and Lloyd could use the hunters for other tasks. When Lloyd and Javier arrived at the orcs' village, they were surprised to see Arash and his father embracing each other tightly, their power emanating in full force. Lloyd was excited at the prospect of gaining 120 powerful orcs to work for him. He also took notice of the priceless objects the orcs possessed and decided to acquire them as well. Lloyd explains to Javier that he will make a soik bingo for the orcs in return for their precious objects. A soik bingo is a building that will keep the food cold and preserve it for later use. They needed granite for making that building, but it was not easy to break. Lloyd knew that he could get some help from Javier, as in the novel, he was able to use a lethal skill in order to save a city trapped within a powerful evil magic force field. He tried to explain this technique to Javier, who grew suspicious of him. Anyway, Javier agreed to try the technique on the granite rocks. Javier was able to get it right in the first try, but at the expense of tearing his clothes. With the help of Javier, Podong, orcs, and his men, Lloyd was able to get things done. The only thing left was to get some ice and some insulation. They had sent 5 men to fetch those things 3 weeks ago, but they had not come back yet. Lloyd then decided to go look for them along with Javier, but Javier wanted to complete this mission alone as it could be dangerous. However, Lloyd still insisted on going with him, telling him that he is the one responsible for all of his men. As they leave, he comes across a glove and a straw for insulation on the ground. Javier informs Lloyd that he is feeling something off with the Prasia Gorge. He can sense an unnatural presence of mana there. Lloyd remembers reading something about it in the novel and realizes something. He tells Javier to rush there as their men might already be dead by now. Lloyd and Javier come across the Lupelin, where Lloyd remembers it being a hideout of a dark sorcerer named Lupelin. He gets angry at the idea of him harming his men. As Javier steps inside the dungeon, he's bravely saved from a booby trap by Lloyd. Afterwards, Javier is able to avoid all the booby traps using his skill. Javier raises his suspicion again about Lloyd knowing about everything, but brushes off his thoughts since he needs to focus on saving Lloyd's men first. Meanwhile, Lupelin takes out one of Lloyd's men and starts his experiment on him. As he's about to kill him, Lloyd and Javier walk in. Lupelin then shifts his attention to both of them and traps them while releasing sleeping gas in order to knock them out. On the other hand, Lloyd holds his breath and starts digging into the ground with his shovel. Lloyd realizes that the sleeping gas won't affect Javier since he is immune to all kinds of insomnia treatments. As he digs the hole, he tells Javier to get inside. Javier gets inside and uses his mana blast to slam open a hole in the ground on the other side where Lupelin is, much to his shock. Lupelin then summons a lethal monster to fight both of them. Before the monster could attack, Javier uses his mana blast and cuts him in half. Lloyd is surprised by Javier's book because it was not even in the novel. Having beaten the ghoul, the dark sorcerer starts panicking. Lloyd takes advantage of that and threatens Lupelin for abducting his men, prompting him to start apologizing profusely. Lloyd exhorts him for all the valuables in the cave while Javier gets to rescuing the workers. Lloyd learns that Lupelin was doing research to bring back his dead wife and child. He used to work at the Lord's castle, but the wicked Lord tried to steal away his wife. When he tried to run away with his family, the Lord tracked him down and, The story is cut off by Lloyd rather rudely, who condones his actions, saying that his family wouldn't thank him for bringing them back to life after he killed so many people to bring them back. The sorcerer starts crying at Lloyd's words. Lloyd stands up and says he'll be back to take the tools, but seemingly forgives the sorcerer, telling him never to hurt anyone again. Lloyd remembers that in the story. Javier forgave Lupelin, but he ended up turning into a monster after killing hundreds more. Lupelin ends up attacking Lloyd and Javier as they walk away, all according to Lloyd's plan, leading Javier to cut him down, essentially preventing him from becoming a bigger nuisance. In his past life as Suho Kim, Lloyd tried to stay respectful, even in the face of a rude boss, thinking that someday the man may change, but he realized that the bully just took him for a pushover. At one point, the guy abused his parents, and Lloyd beat him to a pulp. The only repercussions were that the guy stopped being trash to him afterwards. That's when he realized that the villains deserved punishment. Everyone heads back safe and sound after the kidnapping. Lloyd helps out his exhausted workers by carrying all of their tools. He convinces them to give him their bags by threatening to deduct their bonuses. Javier watches on, observing the workers' reaction as their loyalty towards Lloyd increases. At the Orc village, Arash has a look at the suck bingo, but questions why it's just a bit cooler than the outside. He doesn't believe the meat won't spoil here. Lloyd tells him that that is indeed the case until the ice shows up. Arash states that there isn't any ice in the area though. Lloyd intends to make some, much to Arash's disbelief. The screen does judge Lloyd for messing with Arash though. Arash decides to have faith in Lloyd and leaves, after which Javier asks him how he intends to make ice in the first place. Surprisingly, Lloyd has absolutely no idea. Javier starts scolding Lloyd for making a contract with the orcs without having a plan on how to complete the building. Lloyd's about something about people and giving up and entrepreneurs, but Javier doesn't buy it. Later that night, Lloyd starts thinking of ideas. He intends to make a mold and have it filled with water using podong and bangle. Thinking of the mages who use ice magic, Lloyd starts pondering and soon determines that he may be able to convert the mana surrounding him. Next day, Lloyd has the molds filled with water before using the Asrahan core technique to absorb the warm mana out of the water, effectively cooling it. Javier watches on as Lloyd performs trial and learns. The window pops up and states that Lloyd has leveled up his Asrahan core technique. After a few days, the orcs come over to see that the building is exceptionally cold. They rejoice and celebrate with Triceps Day. The Sand and Steel tribe thanks Lloyd and provides him with the promised 120 orc workers. Grateful for his help, Akush declares that as of now, the family of Lloyd Frontera in the Sand and Steel tribe are now blood brothers. The window pops up, solidifying that the orc tribe has accepted Lloyd and his RP increases by 100. After arriving back to the town, Lloyd has to pacify the obviously frightened townspeople, considering that he brought home so many orcs. Even his parents were shocked at the sight. The window pops up again, telling Lloyd that his story of defeating the Dark Sorcerer and rescuing his workers has spread across the land. The bonus RP for his heroics is 300. The Baron manages the orcs' exercise equipment while Lloyd goes through Lupelin's tools. He learns something from one of the books and rushes off to the mine, leaving Javier to tidy up. Lloyd reaches the mine and calls for Tortoise. He tells him that he no longer has to worry about spending 500 years working for him, because there's a spell that can turn a corpse into an obedient ghoul, so Tortoise can continue working for the whole 520 years. Even the ruler of the underworld is impressed at how evil Lloyd is. Lloyd heads back to see his father, only to find that Shiloh and Meatloaf have come to meet him. Lloyd walks in to find that they are trying to extort the Baron for the mine. Lloyd offers a repayment plan of his own. He threatens them with a roche at his back. After chasing away the debt collectors, Lloyd talks with his father about the repayment. The next issue on hand is how to feed the orcs, since they eat more than 10 times a normal human. The orcs are incredible workers, to the point where one had to be dragged off after working 24 hours constantly. The other best part is they don't need any money, only food. Lloyd proposes that tax revenues be increased exponentially to buy meat for the orcs, but the Baron isn't keen on increasing taxes for the people since they're already struggling. Lloyd understands that and intends to have the people make a lot of money by transforming the Merit's wetlands into farmland and giving it to the people. Lloyd heads out to the abandoned lands with Javier in tow. He asks Lloyd about how he plans to make the land suitable for farming. Lloyd tells him he has a plan, although he knows it's a difficult task considering the terrain and the amount of water around. The Baron and Javier show up to find that Lloyd is still trying to find a way to convert the land for the past 21 days without proper food or rest. Javier asks the Baron if he wants him to stop Lloyd, but he says that he doesn't want to get in the way of his son, considering how much he changed from a hooligan. Javier agrees, saying that Lloyd won't give up until he keeps his word. One fateful night, Lloyd has finally found a way to drain the water from the land. Happy with his achievement, Lloyd lies on the ground, only for a message to pop up saying that he's unlocked the design skills simulation mode. Lloyd gets super peeved at the message considering how easy it would have been with that skill. The dialogue box tells him that it's all because of his wish. The pop-up and Lloyd have a conversation about the wish, but Lloyd only gets a vague response. He then calls Bangle and Podong before using his RP to summon a water-guzzling hippo named Hamong. Lloyd isn't too happy since Hamong can't grow like Podong, so he tries to summon another creature, but he can only play the summon game once a day. Bangle and Podong go on a strike because of how mean Lloyd is to Hamong. Coerced by employee rights, Lloyd asks Hamon about his skill. Hamon displays his skill of storing water by sucking up an exceptionally large pool of water. The group gets to work, beginning with a vertical drainage system for the wetlands. Hamon dumps the water into the river, and the workers clear the ground of debris and weeds. After that's done, Javier makes holes in the ground for bamboo stalks to be planted. After a few more steps, being repeated and then 10 days of grueling work, the group completes a sector of the lands. Javier admires the land that was converted from a wasteland into farmland, and how he got hooked into all of this in the first place. Lloyd hands the knight some seeds to kill pests, trapping Javier into working for him again. The Baron approaches Javier, thoroughly impressed at the miracle his son brought forth. Lloyd is satisfied with the RP he received for his efforts. As the crop starts sprouting, Lloyd proposes that they build a water wheel to remove water when the rains come. As he is discussing this with Javier, the Viscount Lacona from the north of the Maritz wetland shows up with his goons, asking who's in charge of this project. As Lloyd comes forward, they tell him to leave the place. The northern parts technically belong to the Viscount of Lacona, even though no one has stepped foot on them for a long time, while the southern parts belong to Baron Frontera. Seems like the Viscount wants the land to himself now that it's rich and fertile. Lloyd has something up his sleeve as he addresses the Viscount. His lackey speaks for him, prompting Lloyd to put him in his place. Lloyd then introduces himself as the son of Baron Frontera. The Viscount dismisses him and asks for his father. Lloyd responds by mocking him before stating that the Land Act of the Kingdom allows special exemptions regarding the development of barren land. He continues to talk about how the law talks about establishment of ownership of the reclaimed land, and further, how such land falls under the developer of the land, who invested in reclaiming it. The last condition of having the first crop ready for harvest was taken care of by Lloyd back when he told Javier to plant a certain crop to deter pests. After thoroughly angering the Viscount, Lloyd gives him the first crop before telling him to get off his land. As the nobles leave, Javier asks Lloyd how he knew about their coming, through a prophecy or something, because Lloyd tells him that he simply dealt with the people who try to steal others' hard work. The weather changes and heavy rains start pouring in the wetlands. The water wheel is working, but Lloyd continues watching over with Javier by his side. After the rains pass, the screen pops up stating that a large amount of skill experience was gained after this remarkable feat. Lloyd readies himself for stage 2 of his plan. Meanwhile, in Lacona, the Viscount learns that the land has become a gold mine. He tells his supervisor to call the supervisor of the dye workshop. Lloyd wakes up to a severe headache and finds that Javier is experiencing the same. Lloyd and Javier go to town and find that everyone has a headache while the animals are avoiding water. Realizing that the problem is in the water, Lloyd recalls that the Lacona region's main source of income is their dyeing technology. He realizes who the culprit is behind everything. Back at the mansion, the Viscount's lackey is having a meeting with the Baron. He tells Frontera that if they give half away of the wetlands, they'll stop dumping their dye's wastewater. The Baron calls out the blackmail and says he'll take them to court, but the Lacona representative states that the verdict will take at least 2 years, and they doubt Frontera will last that long considering the legal fees and payments for the drinking water. As the lackey gets up to leave, Lloyd shows up. After getting on the lackey knight's nerves, Lloyd is challenged to a duel. Lloyd wins immediately. The lackey heads back to the Viscount, who intends to use his beating as an opportunity against the Baron to add more years to the entire court process. But Lloyd is well aware of his opponent's thought process, and instead hypes up his workers. Lloyd has a reservoir made to solve the drinking water problem, using hamang as a way to fill it up with clean water. Javier tells Lloyd that this doesn't seem like a viable solution for the long term, to which Lloyd replies that he intends to construct a water supply system to bring water from Lake Kapua in the eastern mountains, while making a profit at the same time. A few months later, Viscount Lacona seems distressed when he gets a message from Lloyd. The Viscount reluctantly meets him and realizes that Lloyd is behind his crumbling dye workshop. Lloyd mockingly tells the Viscount that after learning that they were polluting the water, he had a path dug from the lake to the land at an astronomical cost. During their construction work, a lot of excavation was done, which resulted in limestone piling up in the water that flows to the dye workshop. This was the reason why the dye business was in crisis. The Viscount threatens Lloyd, overtaking him to court as he walks out. On the way back, Javier asks Lloyd why he only provoked the Viscount. It may just lead to a long fight in court. Lloyd smugly tells him to wait and see. A month later, the Viscount shows up on his knees, begging Lloyd to save his workshop. After mocking the Viscount, Lloyd offers him a water supply contract at a high rate. After reading the signed contract, the Baron sits in disbelief, realizing that their debt can be paid off. Javier realizes how devilish Lloyd's plan is. After the news, the Baron tells Lloyd about the treasure received from the Orc tribe. A certain Count Cremo wants to purchase it for a handsome price, seemingly to construct a statue. In Cremo, the city of commerce, the Count watches as the monster Giga Titan emerges from the water. In the garden, Javier talks to the Baron about Lloyd's plan for Cremo. The Baron recalls how he found courage after watching Lloyd and the people's efforts. He realized that he wasn't a competent lord. Javier disagrees, saying that he's the kindest person, remembering how Javier was saved by the Baron when he was abandoned as a child in the cold streets. The Baron thanks him, but believes that a leader needs firm principles. He then asks Javier to no longer monitor Lloyd, but rather protect him as the heir of this land. Javier remembers his dream of becoming a knight to protect the Baron, the sword he was given by him, and how the hooligan Lloyd broke the sword to bully him. It seems that Javier hasn't forgiven Lloyd for that. At night, Lloyd annoys Javier again as he lulls him to sleep. As the two are fast asleep, an assassin appears, the knight from Lacona. As he's about to attack Lloyd, Javier wakes up and subdues the assassin. The knight is later handed over to the Viscount. Lloyd realizes that the assassination was probably because he was the first person to be fired. After learning that Lloyd thought this may happen, Javier tells him that they should have taken precautions. Lloyd seems genuinely surprised at the question and says that he doesn't need precautions when he has Javier by his side. Lloyd makes it clear how much he trusts him. The window appears and states that Javier is finally letting go of his long-term resentment. On the way to Cremo, after some arguing with Javier, Lloyd decides to learn how to ride a horse. After confusing the others with their argument, the pop-up screen tells Lloyd that the rumors of him building the first waterworks in the continent are spreading pretty fast, and RP has been rewarded, bumping his total to 2275. The group finally reaches Cremo midwinter. Javier and Lloyd are greeted by the Count. Only problem is, he mistook Javier for Lloyd. Lloyd even got shouted at by the Count when he tried to rectify his misunderstanding. Sometime later, after the misunderstanding is laughed off by the Count, Lloyd recounts how, in the Night of Iron and Blood, Javier became a criminal after beheading Shiloh and Meatloaf. He went into hiding afterwards, only to be arrested by the Count in Cremo. Although things didn't go as expected because the Count recognized his character and ended up supporting him. The Count talks to Lloyd about the statue he wishes to build due to the increasing trade in Cremo. The Giga Titan's presence causes fear, even though it hasn't attacked anyone directly. Lloyd doesn't know much about what happened because the novel ended before any details about Cremo's fate were revealed. The Count believed that if he created a statue of a mermaid, the nemesis of the Giga Titan, it might go away. But the Count gave up on the idea because it would raise the seabed to the point where boats might not be able to dock. After some thinking, Lloyd offers to build the statue for the Count without disturbing the water level. Lloyd heads out to scan the seabed. After getting the information, he talks with Javier about his plan to use cement. a material foreign to this world. As the two reach the dock, a woman appears with a love letter in hand for Lloyd Frontera. The girl's name is Christine, the daughter of the Count. She thinks Javier is Lloyd. Javier casually takes the letter, ticking off Lloyd thoroughly. Javier makes it worse by being shocked at Lloyd never having received a love letter before. After that little bump, Lloyd continues working as the Count gathers the materials. The hardest to get is volcanic ash, a requirement for Roman cement. Since it would take more than 6 months to gather it, Lloyd opts for Plan B, Portland cement. He doesn't know the exact details on how to make it, so he goes for trial and error. After constantly failing, Podong, Bengal, and Hamong try to get the attention from the husk of a Lloyd, but he tries to ignore them. Then he suddenly remembers when the last member of his family, his dog, died. Lloyd drops his research to play with his summons. While on a walk with the three, Lloyd apologizes and thanks them. The three seem to acknowledge his feelings and their bond level increases. A skill is offered and the three ask Lloyd to upgrade Bengal. Light shines around Bengal and she floats before the status windows pop out. Bengal learned Volcanic Blast. Lloyd tests out Bengal's new skills in the mountains and finds that she can now create volcanic ash, the core ingredient of Roman cement. Having solved the issue of materials, the team gets started with the first stage of filtering the ash. The Count intends to keep a close eye on Lloyd considering his talents before giving a report to the king. After preparing the materials, Lloyd develops a caisson to cover the base with friction post. Lloyd is rather surprised at how compliant Javier has become. After a bit of banter, work resumes and soon after, the platform is finished. Lloyd tells the Count that the mermaid statue will look like it's floating since the platform is only a bit higher than the water level at high tide. The Count is a bit skeptical over whether it will hold the weight of the statue, but promises Lloyd a reward if he succeeds. At night, the statue is lit up as a celebration dinner is thrown on the boats surrounding it. The Count praises Lloyd for his hard work in front of all the nobles, who again confuses Javier for him and flock all around. The Count laughs at the situation before clearing up the misunderstanding. Meanwhile, Giga Titan observes the statue and moves forward with the intent to kill it. Javier notices something in the distance as Lloyd comes to pester him. He tells Lloyd that something fast seems to be approaching. After hearing its possible size, Lloyd panics, realizing what's approaching. He heads over and tells the Count to evacuate everyone. The Count asks his knight, Genovan, if he detects anything, but he doesn't. So the Count tries to assure Lloyd that nothing is approaching. Lloyd then tells the Count that even though it may have been docile before now, the mermaid statue may be the reason why it's attacking. The Count listens to Lloyd and orders the boats to retreat from the statue. Seeing that the process to move the boats is slow, Lloyd sends Javier to lift the anchor, while he sends Podong to the statue to release the rope. Right as Javier cuts the anchor chain, the Giga Titan approaches and hits the boat Lloyd is on, knocking him into the air. Javier reaches just in time to catch him, but the statue ends up destroyed and the passengers are left overboard. Seeing the situation, Lloyd orders Hamong to suck up all the people while the Giga Titan rampages towards the city. Javier sees the situation but goes into shock, seeing that Lloyd is telling him to run away. The Count is busy with saving the guests from the water while Javier asks Lloyd if he plans to ignore all the people in danger. Lloyd argues that they only came here to make money and to let the city and its army handle the monster. Javier rethinks his opinion over Lloyd, who previously showed such ingenuity in moments of crisis and refused to give up, but now he wants to run away. Lloyd's approval rating with Javier drops 5 points as he tells Lloyd that he could never run away from something like this happening before his eyes. Javier leaves for the front lines. Meanwhile, artillery isn't working on the monster, and it starts using sonic booms to further devastate the city. Seemingly after the broken mermaid statue, Javier reaches the monster as it's about to trample a civilian and uses Mana Blast. The man is saved, but the blast simply bounces off. The Giga Titan turns its attention towards Javier and swiftly drives him into a corner. Javier intends to fight it off until the people are safe. At the same time, Lloyd tries to reason with himself, saying that he's not a hero with special powers, but he suddenly realizes that he can't let the city get destroyed, because then the construction fee will be delayed. The greed is uncanny with this one. Lloyd reaches Javier right as he's about to be hit with another attack. Hamong intervenes and smashes the giant lobster in the buildings, with an angry Lloyd complaining about cash flows. Seeing an opportunity, Javier jumps in, but his attacks keep bouncing off. Even with the situation, Javier is calmed down now that Lloyd is back. A bit earlier, Lloyd had observed Javier's fight and realized that Mana Blast has no effect. He surveyed the monster and realized that its shell is made of a mixture of dentin and chitin, while being 1 meter thick. Seeing the structure of the shell and the energy flowing through it, Lloyd realized that it's using its horn to disperse the energy. Further analysis revealed the monster's weak spot to him. Back in present time, Lloyd tells Javier to cut off his horn. Although he believes the monster won't die with that, Javier still trusts Lloyd and approaches the horn. After advice on how to cut the horn, Podong fends off the monster's attacks as Javier slices off its horn. Right after the horn drops to the ground, Lloyd tells Javier to get the area right between the monster's middle legs. Javier rushes underneath the monster to attack the weak spot, but just as he is about to slice it in half, Lloyd sees Javier's sword drop as the monster puts its weight on him. Luckily, a second before, Podong had dragged Javier out from underneath the Giga Titan. Javier thanks Podong before picking up his sword. Meanwhile, Lloyd commences Plan D. He calls Podong and tells him to carry him somewhere else after asking Javier to lure the monster along the east coast and into the woods. Looks like he asked the Count to prepare something. 15 minutes earlier, while the Count was looking on in horror at the destruction the monster was bringing upon his city, Lloyd had showed up and told him that he had a plan that involved the statue the monster was so obsessed with. Javier lures the Giga Titan to the place Lloyd asked, to find that he had the piece of the statue tied up to a cart. The monster is infuriated and his attention is diverted to the statue, giving Javier the opening he needed. Javier goes to the spot and uses his Mana Blast, but it seems that it's all gotten too weak from overuse and only cracked the outer shell. As Javier falls down, he laments his weakness, only to hear that Lloyd found the opening enough to launch his own attack. As Javier's fall is broken by Hamong, Lloyd rushes towards the gap in the Giga Titan shell. Exhausted and at his limit, Lloyd makes Podong launch him into the air. Prior to beginning the battle, Lloyd had used his RP reserve to level up the Asrahan core technique to level 9, but he was a few RP short of the amount he needed to go to Triple Heart Circle. As Lloyd hangs off the monster's shell, thinking of what he should do, his approval rating with Javier increases enough to gain the extra RP he needed to get to Triple Heart Circle. Lloyd invests his points and upgrades his Asrahan core technique to the point where he can use Mana Blast. Lloyd starts preparing to attack, but right as he is about to launch it, he gets hit hard in the head by a stone. This causes his focus to be broken, and instead of having two heart circles collide, all three of them unleash a devastating attack, but at the cost of putting his heart at risk. The triple core Mana Blast strikes the beast in his weak spot, finally ending its rampage. Javier wakes up surrounded by Lloyd's summons and sees the monster's corpse. He admires the sight when Podong starts pulling on Javier's finger. He follows the distressed three to find Lloyd in a deathly state. Javier rushes to him and checks to find that Lloyd's heart has stopped. A messenger pigeon reaches the Baron, addressed from Count Cremo. Reading the contents, the Baron rushes to Cremo with Marbella and Bayern in tow. The letter read that Lloyd, after accomplishing his construction duties, has fallen into a comatose state, having defended the city from a monster. The Baron is distressed to the point where he rushes to Cremo without prior preparation. On the way, he remembers how Lloyd always addressed him as "my lord" and asks himself whether Lloyd is really his son. The train of thought is broken as a monster approaches the three. Bayern steps off his horse to face the beast, giving the two nobles a chance to run away. The Baron leaves after telling Bayern to meet them at Cremo. Bayern fends off the beast, but he's on the losing end. The beast grabs his shoulders with his teeth and drives Bayern to the ground. With his sword broken, Bayern is in a dire strait, but in the nick of time, the Baron and Marbella show up and attack the monster. taking it down and saving Bayern. Bayern feels ashamed for being unable to properly protect his lord, but the Baron tells him that he has a duty to protect his subjects as well. But things suddenly take a turn for the worse when an entire pack of beasts show up. Bayern takes up a sword, intent on facing the monsters. Right as the pack is about to attack, Javier appears and starts quickly slashing the beasts into pieces. Bayern is surprised to see how much Javier has improved in the short amount of time he was in Cremo. Lloyd's parents ask Javier if Lloyd is alright, but it seems like he's unsure as to his current state. During the fight with the Giga Titan, when Javier took Lloyd's hand, he felt a pulse, even though his heart had stopped. Javier then feels the triple circle heart within him moving at high speeds, due to which he can't read the condition of his heart. The circles are currently keeping him alive. The group reaches Cremo and Lloyd's parents are shocked to see that they fought a monster who brought upon such destruction to the city. Javier tells them that Lloyd is currently being seen by a doctor at the Count's manor. The Baron is extra surprised that his son was able to pull off such a feat. On the way, they hear the townspeople talking about the different ways they were saved by Lloyd and his summons, with all of them moving to the manor to pray for their savior. As they pray for Lloyd's health, one person speaks out saying that he was the reason the Giga Titan attacked in the first place, since it was provoked by the mermaid statue. The man is quickly beaten up and thrown aside. Lloyd awakens to find a pop window stating that he has received a great reward for his achievement. Lloyd asks the screen how his heart hasn't exploded from the triple mana core blast. Right after, Javier shows up to find Lloyd conscious. The shock is short-lived, considering the first thing that comes out of his mouth is when he'll receive payment. His parents enter the bedroom and hug him tight, putting aside the question of whether or not he's really their son Lloyd. In the royal capital Magenta, the Royal Highness has received a letter from the Count of Cremo of Lloyd's exploits. The Empress Alicia Termina Magentano orders Lloyd and his guard to be summoned to the royal capital. After having his heroics spread across the land, Lloyd gains 1500 RP and has learned the skill of Mana Heart. Lloyd can finally shovel even harder. The pop-up window further tells him that since his Mana Heart was born from the impact of the Mana Blast, it has unique capabilities. The first capability is Shock Neutralizer, which neutralizes the impact from Mana Blast without additional protection, meaning he can use all 3 mana circles in the blast. Lloyd is a bit glad that it all worked out, since he could have died in the triple core explosion. The Count gets on the carriage with Lloyd when he starts discussing the cost to fix the buildings in the city. He then says that the cost would definitely have been higher if the Giga Titan hadn't been stopped. Lloyd is clearly implying that his efforts demand some financial compensation, which the Count is particularly well known for. The Count, in the predicament, offers Lloyd 1.5 times the construction fees, but Lloyd pushes forward, eventually extorting 3 times the construction fees. The people cheer as they see Lloyd's carriage, and the Count informs him that he's being taken to a podium to make a speech. Lloyd wonders what to say as he steps on the podium to address the citizens. Miraculously, he comes up with a speech over Ondel floors. After pitching his product to the entire city, Lloyd steps off, telling them they can find further information in the Frontera barony. Seeing Lloyd's nature, the Count realizes that he wants the man by his side. Back at the Frontera estate, Lloyd thinks of Sir Bayern, how he's a good guy but a below-average knight overall. Lloyd's views are changed when Bayern brings in all the plans regarding the wetlands migration and a list of details concerning all the land and people, along with details of recent sales agreements and their profit margins, plus speculated revenue in the long run. Lloyd is shocked to see he's done all that while he was gone. Seeing Bayern's capabilities, Lloyd realizes that he would probably be a managing director at a big corporation if he were born in Korea. It looks like the Ondol flooring contracts were well managed by Sir Bayern and Lloyd's parents. Looks like Lloyd is close to paying off the entirety of the debt owed by his estate. As Lloyd and Javier oversee the coal warehouse construction, a trumpet is sounded, announcing the arrival of a royal messenger. Lloyd has an ominous feeling from the pompous messenger. The messenger starts spouting the contents of the letter, with the gist being that Lloyd and Javier have been summoned to the royal capital for an audience with the Empress. Lloyd was less than pleased, remembering how he got hooked into more work for being good at something. Now he believes he'll be hooked by the Highness and will have to work even more, kissing his sweet country noble life goodbye. Lloyd and Javier are taken in the royal carriage with Lloyd looking like a corpse. Javier tries to cheer him up in his own way by saying that the master he knows would want to weasel out as much money as he can from the Empress, reigniting Lloyd's inherent money-grubbing personality. Lloyd and Javier are taken before the Empress. After initial salutations, the Empress asks Javier about the mana flow she's detecting from him. She believes that he may be a worthy sparring partner, but Javier apologizes, saying that he's merely a nameless knight. Lloyd knows from his partner that the Empress is one of the only 2 sword masters in the kingdom. The Empress offers her appreciation for the deeds as the 2 displayed in Cremo, but tells them that she doesn't much care for another person's recommendation and would rather see their skills herself. She intends to test Lloyd's skills. She asks Lloyd which construction project he believes the most needed in Magenta. Lloyd has the advantage of knowing everything from the book, knowing that the correct answer is the repair of the crumbling palace, but Lloyd chooses to say that he would place a new bridge on the Magenta River that runs through the capital, knowing that the response won't completely satisfy her. The Empress asks for the reason, to which Lloyd responds that others may think repairing the royal palace is the most urgent right now, considering that a dragon had taken off with the palace's tower on 2 occasions in the past. He further says that the way the palace is built now is the cause of the structure crumbling, but the repairs are only necessary at a later date, so it can't be seen as urgent. After the 2 read each other's minds, Lloyd says that the current bridge across Magenta River has been rebuilt 12 times already, as it regularly collapses to the rising waters, and that if she gives him the construction contract, he can build a bridge that will never collapse. The idea is to build a modern suspension bridge. Even with Lloyd's insolence, the Empress realizes that the more she speaks to him, the more she likes him. She asks Lloyd for details, and he starts rambling on suspension bridges. In the novel, the Empress was betrayed by the one she cherished, lost her arm, and turned into the evil butchering tyrant. Lloyd then offers the Empress his head if the bridge fails, and in return, she will guarantee her family's station. The Empress smiles and agrees before Lloyd brings up a written contract, annoying the Empress over him doubting her word. Lloyd says that it's simply a contract that he'll be hung if he doesn't live up to the mark. After sweet-talking the Empress, Lloyd is happy that he got the contract without losing his head. Meanwhile, the Empress's guard, Sir Kyle, talks about Lloyd's shrewdness. He asks her if she was displeased, and she states that she was, because he seemed to know from the beginning that he could beat her, but his pathetic posture was adorable. Afterwards, Lloyd leaves to survey, leaving Javier behind because he keeps attracting the attention of women everywhere in the capital. Lloyd is heading off to see Lloyd Frontera, his little brother who is studying at the Royal Academy. In the novel, Julian had died after his parents killed themselves, and he was kicked out of the dorms. Lloyd reaches the academy. Lloyd finds Julian, who's supposed to be the same age as Javier, and sees that he's very defensive. Lloyd decides to act like he's turned over a new leaf by being nicer than the original Lloyd would have been. Julian is already suspicious of Lloyd because he failed to call him names and even did what his mother told him to do. Lloyd turns around to leave before Julian gets even more suspicious, but remembers that his mother told him to have lunch with him, so he reluctantly asks Julian if he knows of a restaurant. The 2 order while Lloyd tries to be as much of a prick as he's supposed to be, but keeps falling short of Julian's expectations. The 2 have lunch while Julian keeps picking his brain over how Lloyd's changed so much when he gets smacked behind the head by another student. The student starts bullying Julian over having forgotten something. He then starts disrespecting the Frontera family openly, calling Julian impoverished. Lloyd realizes that the academy puts greater value on status, and it's annoying for the students when the son of a poor country baron is near the top of his class. Lloyd thinks of whether he should step in, but Julian is eyeing him not to interfere, when suddenly the student speaks up over being the heir to the Lacona dyed cloth production. Hearing this, Lloyd's evil side acts up. He asks the student who his father is, and learns that it's the Viscount. Before he can say more, Lloyd smacks the student across the room. The other hooligans try to step in and get casually smacked one after another. After smacking everyone else, the Viscount's son, Diego Lacona, punches Lloyd in the face, resulting in an evil smile from Lloyd. Lloyd starts thoroughly pummeling Diego to a pulp while grinning ear to ear like a maniac. Julian intervenes, grabbing Lloyd from behind to stop him. Lloyd tells Julian that he doesn't need to worry about being bullied worse after this because Diego can't bully him if he's dead. Lloyd starts hitting Diego again when the dean shows up with his guards. Lloyd introduces himself to the dean before apologizing to the dean for causing such a commotion. He states that he was merely attempting to restore Her Majesty's honor. He says that Diego was responsible for the bullying, even though he knows that the staff was probably already aware that the bullying Julian suffered, but couldn't do anything for fear of upsetting the aristocrats. The dean asks how that has anything to do with Her Majesty, before Lloyd takes out a crest marking him as a royal guest. The dean kneels in front of the crest, but intends to treat the bullies better, as the crest is only temporary, in the hopes to appease them. Lloyd knows the dean's intentions well enough. Lloyd leaves with Julian to head to the office to request a leave of absence. Julian yells at Lloyd for ruining his life, thinking that the bullying will get worse, and for making him skip studies. But Lloyd reassures him that studying here won't be advantageous in the near future. In the royal palace, Julian meets Javier, who tells him to trust Lloyd's plan. Julian can't believe Javier, but then he tells him that Lloyd was the one who made plans to take down the Giga Titan, along with all the development Lloyd had done in the time Julian was away. Lloyd overhears their conversation through the door. Julian then asks Javier whether someone can truly change like that. Javier responds that he believes it's impossible, and that Lloyd is probably someone in disguise. Javier had suspicions and told Julian that he had read that a soul could, in theory, inhabit someone else's body using a powerful mana tether, and thus investigated Lloyd in secret to sense whether there was any flow of mana forcing a foreign soul into his body. He couldn't find any such abnormality, much to Lloyd's relief. But Lloyd doesn't realize that Javier knows he's outside and wanted him to know that he was suspicious of him. Julian doesn't know that the family was in debt and gives Lloyd credit for having handled everything. Lloyd gets RP now that Julian's approval rating has increased. Lloyd then enters and tells Julian they're leaving for training. Lloyd prepares a rock and clay pizza and has Bangle eat it to create metal wires, which Padang rolls into cables. He then hands Julian the shovel, saying that it's an important task. Julian asks why he handed him such an important task, to which Lloyd replies that it's because he finds him intelligent and responsible. Lloyd goes to his shop to borrow the power of technology that could help with the creation of the suspension bridge. He meets with the royal dwarf master craftsman Corgadus. Lloyd is aware that Corgadus is a stubborn old dwarf and won't move unless he's interested, so he brings out a blueprint and forcefully makes Corgadus see it. Corgadus tells him he doesn't want to see it, but not before taking a peek. Having piqued his interest, Lloyd slyly starts to leave when he's stopped by the dwarf. The dwarf says that the design could snap if not properly built, and Lloyd counters that, saying he's well aware of the consequences if someone other than Corgadus helps with the construction. Corgadus ends up looking at the blueprints and agrees to help. With everything set and the process started, Lloyd heads out with Javier to work on the suspension towers. Right as they are beginning, nobles show up with guards who accuse Lloyd of defrauding Her Majesty. Lloyd is taken to the Empress, where the nobles complain that there's already a bridge on the river that stood for 30 years, yet Lloyd is trying to have another one built. They urge her to punish the fraudster. The Empress brings everyone on the table, and the two sides start stating their case. The first to start is the Builders Guild leader, Victor. He argues that the Magenta Bridge has stood in its spot for 30 years, and saying that it will fall is a slight at the Guild and Her Highness. Lloyd can't bring up future events, so he instead asks the official sitting beside the leader how much he's being paid. The accusation is clear, and the Empress is prompted to highlight Lloyd's mistake as being grave, to groundlessly accuse a royal official. She orders him to be bound and an executioner is placed over him. The Empress declares that he has insulted her with his lies, and she must now restore her honor. Javier reaches for his blade when the Empress asks Lloyd if he has any last words. Lloyd says to exterminate the guilty one's entire bloodline. The Empress asks Victor and the official if they agree, and they do. The Empress then declares that she will prove her vassal's innocence, and summons mages to perform the confession spell on the vassal. The vassal is corrupt, and the two are immediately punished and displayed in public half-naked. Lloyd shows up and tells the two that he pleaded with the Empress not to harm their families. The Empress also orders all of the kingdom's workers to help with the bridge's construction. The work proceeded smoothly and the suspension tower was quickly finished. The cables are attached attached to both the suspension towers as Julian and Javier look on. The bridge is completed and Lloyd gets 1,050 RP, along with being granted the title of Master Builder by the Empress. The estate's debt problem will now be solved, but the issue that remains is that now the Empress will want to use Lloyd's abilities further. The Empress asks him to return to the royal palace with her. Lloyd intends to both escape the Queen's grip and solve Julian's academy problem. At the palace, the Empress bestows Lloyd with a noble title and estate. Lloyd humbly asks the Empress for something bigger by saying he'd rather she withdrew the offer of land and title, and instead he would like a thorough cleansing of the Royal Academy. Lloyd explains that it is currently full of corruption and inequality, where students of lower ranks are subjected to physical and mental suffering. He believes that currently, the Academy is simply a playground for the students to exercise their power rather than learn. Lloyd then asks Javier to take out a paper detailing the results of their 4-month investigation of Academy graduates to teachers who had left due to the Academy's corruption, including their testimonies and claims. The nobles, in a panic, started stating that Lloyd is a liar and that nothing of the sort is happening at the Academy. Furious, the Empress summons mages to cast a confession spell on the nobles who spoke up, all of which are punished before the Empress starts arresting all the people on the list, with extreme repercussions for all of them. Lloyd watches the proceedings with Javier, satisfied that the Queen must have forgotten about his existence so he can sneak back to the countryside, when Sir Kyle shows up behind him to tell him to leave only after he attends the next day's banquet. He further tells Lloyd that the Empress says his plan to create a diversion with the Academy was outstanding, and she respects his wish to live a lazy life. Kyle then leaves the two a bit dumbfounded. Even Javier couldn't sense his approach, considering that Kyle is the kingdom's top swordmaster. Later on, Lloyd has a conversation with Julian about the ongoing events and how he had an idea of what would happen. Julian then tells Lloyd that he doesn't need to force himself to curse him any longer, since he trusts his brother and is proud of him. The cringe aside, Lloyd gets a massive RP boost. At the royal banquet, the Empress asks Lloyd to approach her. She and Javier mess with Lloyd a bit before the Empress commands Lloyd to adhere to her command. Lloyd reluctantly steps closer before the Queen tells him that she'll ready everything for him if he ever changes his mind. She then leaves Lloyd to enjoy his newfound financial freedom. Lloyd starts eating his fill before suddenly realizing that in 3 years, his safety net will fall, considering the evil Queen plot point. Lloyd suddenly hears the line, "The banquet will continue until the moon sets," as Kyle walks behind him. Lloyd remembers it from when the Queen is poisoned and loses one of her arms. It's another secret code used by those plotting the assassination that wasn't supposed to happen for another 3 years. In her chambers, the Queen sits down on the couch, thinking that she may have had too much to drink. She seems to have overworked herself considering the floods, the Academy, and dealing with Ashfahan, the enemy state led by Samarkand, who's assembling an army in his western lands. She doesn't yet completely believe it is a threat because they'd have to cross wild terrain to attack. Alicia suddenly gets a massive headache, and her medical condition starts worsening. She realizes she's been poisoned. She tries to stumble out of the chambers when she finds Kyle at the door. She thinks he's here to help, but instead unsheathes his blade. Meanwhile, Lloyd tells Javier to come with him. Lloyd tells him that he feels something is wrong and that Javier may have to distract the swordmaster. The two rush to the Queen's chambers to find her fighting with Kyle. Right before he can land the finishing blow, Javier jumps in to distract him. Meanwhile, Lloyd goes to the Queen and uses the Asrahan core technique to absorb the poison from her body. Javier continues holding Kyle back, but the tables quickly turn and Kyle slashes Javier down his chest. Kyle stays on the offensive after the first shallow wound, but Javier dodges and calls out to Padang, who throws him his sword. Javier uses a mana blast to knock Kyle out of the room. Javier stays on the offensive while Lloyd continues absorbing the poison from the Empress. Lloyd even scolds her, which annoys the Queen, but she suddenly realizes that he's being affected by the poison, trying to save her life. During this time, Javier has pushed Kyle out of the hall and stands to guard the entrance. Kyle grins and summons all the guards, deceiving them by saying that they came to assassinate the Queen. Javier knocks back the elite guards, and Kyle recognizes the threat he'd become if he rose to Swordmaster status. Kyle begins charging the aura sword and attacks Javier. His sword is broken, and he lies on the ground in tatters. Lloyd has finally completed the poison absorption, but the poison starts taking over. The Queen tells him to gather the poison in an arm, so she can remove it by cutting it off, but Lloyd refuses to lose an arm considering how difficult it would become to shovel. Instead, Lloyd uses a knife to fire off a powerful mana blast. Kyle notices the explosion of mana before Javier gets on his feet. With his sword broken and his body in suboptimal condition, Javier intends to keep his oath. Javier remembers a conversation he had with Lloyd after the fight with the Giga Titan. He neglected his duties at the time, and his lack of strength made his master suffer. Javier thought himself unfit to bear the title of a knight, but Lloyd simply said that he doesn't need to worry because he'll be docking his pay for 6 months. Javier swore at the time, after trying to negotiate the penalty, that he would never again abandon his duties. He also intended to become a swordmaster within a year to catch up to Lloyd's progress. Lloyd then began talking about how there's a limit to how far humans can push the mana heart in theory. They can't surpass that limit. He's about to explain how a swordmaster breaks those limits when Javier stopped him midway, saying that he intends to learn himself. Back in the present, Javier gets pierced by Kyle's blade, but he defends himself from the aura sword. Kyle is intent on ending Javier, but he is suddenly consumed by Kyle's mana pouring out from the aura sword. Kyle knocks Javier back, rendering him in an unconscious state, but only momentarily. Javier rises again, this time imbuing his broken blade with the Swordmaster's mana. Javier enlarges his blade and the two clash with their aura swords. Javier comes out on top and cuts off Kyle's arm. The guards step in only to have a Swordmaster standing before them. The Queen holds the collapsed Lloyd's hand, telling him to take her mana. Lloyd opens his eyes halfway for a dialogue box to pop up saying that he's unlocked a new mana heart option, immunity to all types of poison and supercharge. The ability to absorb large amounts of mana from the surroundings when mana is depleted. The Empress smacks Lloyd on the head after he grins like an imbecile. Lloyd can barely move, so he uses the supercharge ability and starts absorbing mana from everything around him. The Queen panics for a moment since her mana is being absorbed at an exponential rate, but calms herself and offers Lloyd her mana. Lloyd wakes up again to find the surroundings drained and his mana heart level having increased to that of a low-ranking sword expert. Further, he's unlocked the Frenzy skill, which turns on Berserker mode for 60 seconds. In said mode, strength, stamina, and reflexes increase by 200%. Lloyd suddenly notices that Her Highness has been drained and panics. The Empress tells him that she'll ask for details later, as the first priority is to apprehend Kyle. Lloyd carries her upon her request, and the two head out to help Javier, only to find him standing with his aura sword in hand and Kyle on the floor. The Empress orders the guards to lower their weapons before ordering for the investigation of everyone that was part of the banquet. As the Empress leaves, Lloyd asks Javier about his power-up and is a bit annoyed when he casually brushes it off. The window pops up and tells Lloyd that he's satisfied a hidden condition and unlocked the compliment system, whereby any achievement earned leads to an honorary title of praise, and each title comes with its own bonus skill. Additionally, at midnight of every full moon, a certain amount of compliment points will be awarded. Lloyd is shown a list of wacky titles suited to his face. He chooses the title related to the happenings in Cremo. After the investigation, Lloyd heads back to his room where Julian asks him if they found who was behind Sir Kyle. Turns out that he caught the people conspiring with him, but the confession spell doesn't work because it's being blocked by a protection spell. Lloyd realizes that the progression of the plot is happening too quickly, making his knowledge of the future events effectively redundant. Julian then asks about Javier and learns that he was summoned separately by the Queen since he became a swordmaster. Julian momentarily goes into shock after hearing that he became a swordmaster. In the hall, the Queen addresses Javier and tells him that the position of captain of the Royal Guard is currently vacant before commanding him to stand by her side and take his place as captain moving forward. Javier asks the Empress for forgiveness, stating that he is Baron Arcos Fronteras' knight and is unable to leave his side. The Queen states that it was a command, and that disobeying a command is tantamount to treason. Javier responds by asking her to allow him to send a line of farewell to the Lord Baron. The Empress realizes that Javier would rather die than serve her. She allows him to leave. Javier walks out to find Julian, who asks her what she said. Javier replies that he will always be a knight of the Frontera family. Later at night, Lloyd checks on the other titles he got. One title allows him to have the subjects of Frontera obey him unconditionally. The second allows him to use the Orc Roar. The title related to Queen Alicia means that he has her complete trust over anyone else. It's the night of a full moon, and Lloyd receives CP for the titles he has. He checks out the ending spoiler reward where he can spend CP to catch a glimpse of the ending scene for the storyline. He clicks and finds the Frontera estate in ruins. Lloyd rushes around and finds that in the future, he's on the ground in front of the bodies of his parents, wishing he'd come back sooner. As Lloyd is screaming over the kind of future this is, a swarm appears above him. It's a swarm of fanged locusts. He sees Javier try to cut down the swarm to no avail before waking up. Lloyd asks the dialogue box whether all of this was real before rushing to the Queen. Lloyd tells her that the entire Cremona region will be reduced to dirt unless they mobilize troops to prepare for the calamity. He tells her that it's the work of Asfahan, trying to set up a Kamino for monsters to sap the country's strength. They're planning to encroach on monsters in the eastern wilderness to drive the monsters out until they reach the eastern region. The Empress does not believe that it may be possible before she asks Lloyd how he knows this. She tells him that he's hiding too much from her, and at the moment seems more suspicious than Asfahan. Lloyd proceeds to spout a whole bunch of rubbish, like overhearing Kyle's assassination attempt, the orcs telling him about the monster trouble, and learning from Javier how to absorb mana and release it. The Empress does admit that it makes sense, but her gut tells her that he's making this up on the spot. Alicia gives him command of her white cavalry along with wizards. She then states that there's a price to trusting his baseless speculations, to which Lloyd replies that if he stops these attacks, he shall tell the whole world that she was the one who predicted this matter, allowing her to restore the honor of her crown. Alicia agrees. Lloyd and Javier push back to the Frontera estate, aiming to get there in 5 days. Lloyd sends Podong away, having told him his plan. The two make it back just in time to see the locusts floating above the town. Lloyd tells the people to get to their houses and bring a lid to him. The Frontera estate is being attacked by the locusts, so Lloyd's parents take up arms. The Baron heads outside to join Bayern and the other soldiers. Meanwhile, Bayern is rushing with his soldiers to the residence, but realizes that the villagers are in danger. He remembers the Baron's order to save the people before him in the event of a crisis, and reluctantly goes to protect the people first. The orcs take up arms as well, and begin fighting the ravenous beasts. Suddenly, the sound of a gong is heard in the distance. The locusts stop attacking and fly off to the sound of the pot lid held by Lloyd. Javier and Lloyd lure the swarm away from the town before heading off to Lacona with it, looking to save their neighbor too. The Viscount is in a dire position when Lloyd appears with his makeshift gong. He lures the swarm from Lacona while Javier wonders what's inherently wrong with the man. After Lacona, Lloyd heads to the Merit's wetlands but finds another swarm approaching from the front. Javier uses his aura sword to cut through, but the horses start becoming exhausted, so he jumps on Javier's back and tells him to run. Lloyd yells for Bengal and Hamong, who appear from the river. Bengal uses a devastating blast of flame to wipe out a large number of the locusts. Hamong then attacks with a blast of water, before Lloyd and Javier use Mana Blast to take care of most of them. The numbers have decreased significantly, but there are still a few thousand left. Lloyd tells Javier not to worry, as the cleanup crew will be arriving soon. Looks like Padang was told to reach out to the Orc tribe, who brought 300 elite warriors, while the Queen's white cavalry of 500 soldiers and 50 wizards arrived as well. Lloyd tells Javier that he'll let them handle the locusts while they prepare for the next inevitable wave of monsters.